Hi there, my name is Jackson Lowell, and I'm here today to share a poem that I wrote about myself. This poem is an expansion on a previous piece that I had written about my identity. The previous piece was prose, but it was getting at both the external and internal sides of myself. And while I feel prose as traditionally the language, or the form, I should say, of logic and rationality is maybe a good mode to express these outward sides of our identities. Poetry, traditionally seen as the language of passion and deep emotion, is maybe a better mode for expressing internal sides of ourselves. So, because I'm trying to get at these deeper sides of my identity, I felt that poetry would be a more fitting mode for that. And I also was really passionate to read this poem and share it with you orally, as opposed to just sharing the text and having you read it yourself. And that's because poetry has a long tradition of oral presentation, and that's actually how poetry began. And a lot of people forget that, and a lot of people read poems to themselves without orating the text. But I really want to emphasize the importance of orating. So before I read, I actually would just like to share a quote that I've gathered here by Jorge Luis Borges. He's an Argentinian writer and poet, and he wrote, "Truly fine poetry must be read aloud. A good poem does not allow itself to be read in a low voice or silently. If we can read it silently, it is not a valid poem. A poem demands pronunciation. Poetry always remembers that it was an oral art before it was a written art. It remembers that it was first song." I just want to repeat that last part. It was an oral art before it was a written art. It remembers that it was first song. So, yeah, poetry was always originally intended to be read aloud, and it's only sort of a newer tradition that it's been co-opted by prose modes of representation. And although it is still a logocentric art form, it is sort of this blend between written expression and verbal expression. And also, because of this oral tradition in poetry, another huge passion of mine is using the poetic art form to bridge the gap or to help indigenize curriculum and education, because the oral tradition in indigenous communities of storytelling and history keeping has long been sort of discredited by Western academia that really favors prose and really favors written expression. But what people forget is that these art forms like poetry that have been accepted for centuries in Western academia are actually also rooted in oral tradition. So if we can get back to that oral tradition, I think that that can also help pave the way forward for recognizing the value of indigenous oral tradition and indigenous storytelling. Okay, so anyways, I'll read this poem about myself now, and it's called Jackson Lowell's Song of Himself, which, as that quote mentions, poetry remembers that it was first song. And this poem that I've written is inspired by Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, and Whitman famously calls his poems songs because, again, that implication that they're meant to be read aloud. Okay, so Jackson Lowell's Song of Himself, with inspiration and quotes from Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. I am not contained between my hat and boots. To judge me at face value is folly, for as you look with your eyes, you see but half the picture. My body and my pursuits, my passions and my moods, These come to me days and nights and go from me again, but they are not the me myself. Of myself, I can say this much. I am boy encased in boy's body, my respiration and inspiration, the beating of my heart, my passion for a life lived out of doors. I throw myself at the rock and throw myself in the surf. I am mad for it to be in contact with me, to forge a bond between boy and earth. I am enamored of growing outdoors, of people that live among cattle or taste of the ocean or woods, combing the beach for sea glass or hunting through forest for mushrooms. There are infinite worlds of beauty beneath our noses if only we'd look down. And if only we'd look out, behold, landscapes projected masculine, full-sized and golden, like a shock of golden locks. Oceans deep and pale Germanic blue, the beauty below and the beauty above and about, quivering me to a new identity. But what of the beauty within? It's time we unscrew the locks from the doors, unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. It's time, I say, we had a look inside, a look behind closed doors, behind the eyes of the beholder and behind these blue eyes beheld. What is that you express in your eyes? It seems to me more than all the print I have read in my life. For this spirit in me flits hither and thither, unobservable when looking dead on, unreckonable to the outward eye. Have you reckoned the earth much? Have you practiced so long to learn to read earth like the leaves of a book? To read the spirit beneath the earth's surface? To elaborate is no avail. Learned and unlearned feel it is so. But this spirit learning can't happen in the classroom. It requires living experience, suffering, triumph, lips that have smiled, eyes that have shed tears. I exist as I am, that is enough. I am my inward self as much as my outward self. And through this life, through these human interactions, I remove the veil. I am the poet of the body, and I am the poet of the soul. I express my body outwardly in the land, and share my soul around the hearth. Of these more or less I am, and of these one and all I weave the song of myself. Thank you. So, I've quoted a bunch from Whitman's Song of Myself there, and I'll just go to the bottom here where I've added all the page numbers, and from the edition that I've quoted from, you can rewind the video and go back if you're interested in tracking down where these quotes come from exactly in the poem. Yeah, and thank you. Thank you for letting me share, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.